Buenos días, Cuba. Está escuchando Radio Marti.
Birns got a point. Isn't this just a payoff of Ronald Reagan made a campaign pledge that he would support this thing, so we're going to spend $20 million to fulfill the campaign pledge?
Well, first of all, the chief sponsor of the legislation in the House is Dante Fascell, a Democrat from Florida. Mr. Birns has said this was a payoff to the Florida delegation. The Democrat led the fight for Radio Marti. Secondly, I'm thrilled that for the first time the people of Cuba are going to hear the truth specifically aimed at them, designed for their interests, 60% news and news-related, 40% entertainment and cultural.
Yeah, but they get that. All they had to do is listen to a Miami station.
No, they did a lot of commercials there, some of which aren't bad. It would tell them they can get meat in Miami, which they can't get in Havana. But these programs are not designed for the people of Cuba. For example, one of the commentators on Radio Marti will be Armando Valladares, who spent 22 years in Castro's prisons, a poet who wrote a book from my wheelchair. What a marvelous opportunity for the people in Cuba to hear a man of such literate distinction broadcast to them. What's happening in the rest of the world, Mr. Birns? What's happening in Poland? The people inside Cuba are in an intellectual ghetto. They don't get the information. They have a newspaper called Grandma, which is communist propaganda. All they hear is what Castro wants them to hear. Here's an opportunity to penetrate the Iron Curtain of information and to provide these people with balanced information. Now, the Voice of America and the British Broadcasting Corporation have magnificent reputations for fairness and balance.
Henry,
I'll tell you something. Cuba broadcasts to the United States. How many hours would you say, Larry, a week? As an expert in this field, how many hours does Cuba broadcast propaganda directed to the United States a week?
My guess would be a guess, because I've never heard a program. I get my instructions another way. 90 hours a week.
235 hours a week broadcast from Cuba direct to this country.
Why can't we have it both ways? Well, again, because if we had it both ways, we'd be like Cuba.
I've heard that argument. We don't want to get down with them. Is that it?
And I've heard an argument that you guys put forward, which is that the end doesn't justify the means. And I don't want to create traditions in this country that will get us into the state propaganda business.
I want to ask you a question, Mr. Birns. If you were running the show, God forbid, but if you were running the show, would you halt the broadcasts paid for by the United States government to the Soviet Union, Radio Liberty, to the other Iron Curtain countries, Radio Free Europe? Would you stop those programs?
Well, I probably would, actually. What I would
thought so.
Yes, I'm sure you did. Given the fact that these two operations had their birth in CIA efforts, as did broadcasting against Cuba in the form of Radio Swan.
And have you looked into the possibility, some people say it's a probability, that Castro can retaliate by jamming the signals of some 200 radio stations in the United States?
Yes, he has that potential to do that. He can jam our radio stations, and if he chooses to do that, then that's an act of international outlawry. He has no right to do that, to interfere with the domestic broadcasts within this country. We're not interfering with his broadcast. We are using the international airways to broadcast. That's regulated.
It sounds to me as though you want him to commit this act of international outlawry.
Oh, I certainly don't, but I want Radio Marti to be healthy and to go ahead, because the transistor radio is a little window to the world behind the Iron Curtain.
But if we give up our freedom to listen to our own radio stations, broadcast for our domestic purposes, so that you can have Radio Marti and fulfill Mr. Reagan's campaign pledge, isn't that sort of silly?
No, we'll take them to the World Court. They'll solve everything. The UN set up the World Court, and we'll bring them over there, and they'll issue a judgment in our favor.
Mr. Birns,
contributing to the cause of freedom of information to people who are locked into a Soviet surrogate country like Cuba. is a great contribution to human rights.
We already have the Voice of America going in.
The Voice of America is a worldwide broadcasting system that is not directed specifically at Cuba. It is directed around the world. Now, this Radio Marti is under the aegis and the supervision of the Voice of America.
Do you mind if I read to you, Mr. Hyde, the original concept of Radio Marti, quote, to report to Cubans about their government's domestic mismanagement and its promotion of subversion and international terrorism.
What's wrong with that?
Does that sound like something that the Cubans would love?
Well, no, but we don't care for their 235 hours of lies, and you know they aren't noted for their adherence to truth, that they broadcast to the United States. So we send a little truth into their country in exchange for their lies to us. If he retaliates, there are international legal tribunals to bring the matter before. There is an international telecommunications union, the United Nations. He has no right to do that. We are not interfering with his domestic broadcasting for him to retaliate. You mean the United States should genuflect to Castro because he's going to retaliate? And we should not tell the truth?
The retaliation I'm more worried about than some stations is the fact that his inhumane refusal to let people get out of his country. Doesn't that bother you, Mr. Birns?